The Bible says that there is a time for peace and a time for war.
אנחנו הולמים באויבינו בעוצמה חסרת תקדים. אני מדגיש, זאת רק ההתחלה. זאת רק ההתחלה. They've made a mistake of historic proportions. We will exact a price that will be remembered by them and Israel's other enemies for decades to come.
אני מדגיש, זאת רק ההתחלה. They've made a mistake of historic proportions. We will exact a price that will be remembered by them and Israel's other enemies for decades to come.
Israel has responded with fury. Fighter jets taking aim at targets in the Palestinian territory.
More than 10,000 people have been killed since this conflict began.
كل الدار في 1000 واحد هنا في المنطقة كلهم استشهدوا.
As the Israel-Hamas war drags on, backlash against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is growing at home. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert has heavily criticized Netanyahu.
He's the worst person to have to deal with it. I think that he is really in a nervous breakdown. A person who has portrayed himself and presented himself for many years as Mr. Security failed in the most fundamental obligation for his citizens, which is to provide them with security.
Today, Netanyahu's leadership is on the verge of imploding, deeply unpopular with his own people and under immense pressure from the international community.
La lutte doit être sans merci, mais pas sans règles.
This is a fall from grace for a man who was reportedly told by one of the most powerful Jewish religious figures in the world that he would be the one to welcome the Messiah.
Back then, Netanyahu was probably the only ally that he could work with in Israeli politics. He says, I'm definitely doing that.
The Rebbe never visited Israel, not once, and yet from his home in Brooklyn, he was able to influence Israeli politics. Influence was recognized by American politicians too. US presidents paid homage to him, establishing and proclaiming a National Education and Sharing Day in honor of his birthday.
Please give my warmest regards to the Rebbe on this his 86th birthday.
Would never die. They still believe Rabbi Menachem Schneerson will be physically resurrected as Mashiach, the Messiah.
A physical resurrection when he's going to come back in his full glory imminently and redeem the entire world.
Currently, the center of the Chabadic movement is in Brooklyn, in a neighborhood called Crown Heights. So it is an American movement in terms of its center, but it is also a global movement. Chabad has its own rabbis and emissaries appointed all around the world. It is a global movement.
Headquartered in Brooklyn, the Chabad movement has a presence in every state in America and in over 100 countries around the world, with a particularly high focus in Europe and in Israel. It has hundreds of thousands of followers and runs synagogues, schools, drug rehabilitation centers, and care homes. On the face of it, the movement has been for the betterment of Jews around the world. But according to one analyst, its modus operandi has provided a template for a terror group.
We have good reasons to believe that Fatah got inspired from the Chabad movement. One of the high-ranking members of the Fatah movement was praising the Chabad movement in the sense that the Chabad used to send its emissaries and rabbis all around the world, just like Fatah was doing, sending out teachers to Central Asia and to Africa and to other parts of the world.
For over 40 years, the charismatic... A couple of years after this meeting, the Rebbe reportedly told a young Netanyahu that he would one day become Prime Minister of Israel and would be the nation's last leader before handing the scepter to the Messiah.
So we look at the movements of prophecy from ancient times until now, and we have to visit Nabi Daniel, the prophet Daniel, chapter 7 and chapter 8, for the descriptions of the Antichrist. And in those two chapters, we find a wealth of information about the end of time and also about the Antichrist. Okay? And one of those things is that in the latter part of their reign, when these rebels have become completely wicked, a fierce-looking king and a master of intrigues. In the Hebrew, we find Benachida. He's an understander of intrigue and deception. He will arise. Okay? That's the Antichrist. And this is the group of people who are coming with him. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. We read in the book of Revelations that the Antichrist comes and he rules over all nations and tongues. Okay? So he's able to use his understanding of intrigue to be able to create a scheme whereby he usurps control of the whole world. And we find in another place in Daniel that it is those from amongst the house of Israel who have abandoned the covenant who will give him and provide him with intelligence. This is why we see the scripture telling us that he becomes powerful, but it's not by his own power. And he becomes very strong, but not by his own power. He causes astounding devastation, as we can see. And he succeeds in whatever he does, and he will destroy those who are mighty, okay, and the holy people. He causes deceit to prosper, okay? So he causes deceit to show success, okay? Deception and treachery show success in his hand. And he considers himself superior, okay? So he's going to actually be one that is a supremacist. This is where the race superiority complex comes in when we're dealing with the Antichrist reality. The Antichrist will be one who is a type of racist. So these are the characteristics that we will find not only in the main agitator of Antichrist reality, the main creator and causer of Antichrist reality, but in the general system of Antichrist and those who are a part of it, which are the jinn races. The Gentiles will be the primary agents of the Antichrist reality, and they will be the ones coming in command or coming by command of the Antichrist. And we also recognize that the black house of Israel will also be working in tangent with this Antichrist, like we mentioned before, giving him intelligence and also satanically trying to bring to fulfillment prophecy. He says that the violent ones, haferitz, the violent tyrants amongst our own people will exalt themselves in fulfillment of the chazon, of the vision, but they will fail. Okay? They will stumble and they will fall. We also read in the 11th chapter that this Antichrist will, with flattery, will corrupt those who have violated the covenant. But the people who know Yahweh will firmly resist him. And so what does this look like in real time? This corruption of those who have forsaken or violated the covenant? It looks like money. It looks like the reality of money. Hollywood, hip hop, pop culture. Everybody who is representing the movement of Antichrist is laid and paid. We have some other prophetic references that we will uncover, inshallah, at a later time. But right now, we want to get into this description of the Antichrist. Now, it's also said, and this is all the things that we've seen take place. He said that at the end, we're going to see him invade many countries and sweep through them like a flood. He will also invade the beautiful land, and many countries will fall. Okay? And this is what we see taking place in the Middle East. The Middle East has been what? Invaded by many Gentile forces, including the top Gentile force, okay, that's coming from the West, okay? But there's powerful destruction that comes from this, and it also leads to the time of distress, the great fitna. And he says that this fitna is such that has not happened from the beginning of nations until that time, but it's going to be at this time, at the climax of this time, that our people will be delivered. Okay? And Yeshua described to us how to recognize this time when it appeared in Luke chapter 21, starting with verse 20. When you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. He then said, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. Okay? Now, the people who were there weren't paying attention to prophecy, and they done got caught and stuck in this place. And now they can't get out. They're getting killed out. Okay? For this is the time of punishment in fulfillment of all that has been written. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. We can see that on the news, as it's clear that 90% of the people affected in the war and killed by it are not militants, are not the soldiers, but it's the women and the children that have been targeted and eradicated in this particular incident. And this is what's been described in the scriptures. We understand that there are 6 armies that are surrounding Israel. Qasim Soleimani gave us that information. Okay. And Ghulam Ali Rashid conveyed that information. Those 6 armies have Israel surrounded right now. This is why they have not been able to remove Hamas. There will be great distress in the land and wrath against this people, and they will fall by the sword. They will be taken prisoners to all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So for those who were confused about who's in the land right now, according to Yeshua, the Messiah you're supposed to be following, he said there's going to be the Gentiles in there. So what's going to be going on all over the rest of the world while this is taking place? He said there'll be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. We've seen this with eclipses. Okay. We've also seen this with other astronomical phenomenons. He also says on the earth, nations will be in what? Anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. And people will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming to the world. For the heavenly bodies will be shaken. That is what is taking place. The governments of the earth are shaken. And at that time, they will see the Son of Man coming in the cloud with power and great glory. And he tells us, when these things begin to take place, stand up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. And then the Prophet Muhammad told us that these signs are going to come like the beads of a necklace when it's been broken. One thing after the other. The Talmud tells us the same thing. Once we see one thing happen, it won't clear up until something else comes and takes its place. And he tells us in the book of Daniel that the end is going to come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. Okay? And at the temple, he will set up the abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. So this is what we're looking at. And we can see these things in our news. We can see these things in our society. All of the manifestations of these signs have come to bear. Okay? And beyond a shadow of any doubt, this is the end of time.
America living in revelations is causing hysteria. Esoterica foundation of America living in revelations is causing hysteria. Esoterica foundation of America.